welcome in. We're going to be talking today. Actually, it's not me alone in the studio. It kind of looks that way. I'm your host, Lauren Deal, and I got the privilege to host with Anthony, who's sitting next to me. You'll see him in a minute. But we're going to be talking to you all about one of the most influential and fascinating companies of, I like to say, our lifetime. So, Anthony, welcome to the show. And
Thank you so much.
Tell us about what this is.
Yeah, so what is Splunk? A lot of folks, especially if you're in IT, you've probably heard the name Splunk, but you might not know exactly what it is. And Lauren, it is so beautifully simple. This is what Splunk does. It takes any text data that you might be storing in your company, and it, great word, ingests it into an index. So why would you want this? Well, think about it. These days, we log everything. And think about every department of an organization. So you have human resources. They're logging things like time off and rates of pay and hours worked, or weeks worked, and salaried employees, all that kind of stuff. You look at marketing and sales, they're logging and tracking everything that goes on. IT is certainly doing this. So all of that text log data can be ingested into Splunk for safekeeping, but then for remarkable reporting capabilities. So Splunk is so incredibly useful for organizations because it's going to help all departments of those organizations make sense of all of this data that they tend to be logging. And Lauren, when I say any text data, I really do mean that, both structured and unstructured text data. Now, of course, a big question we have from students right away is, well, what's structured data versus unstructured? Splunk doesn't care as long as it's text data. If it is formatted, maybe it's comma separated values. We're very used to those because we like to maybe export from Excel in that format. That's what we mean by structured data. Sure, Splunk can ingest that and store it for us in the index and make it searchable. But what's remarkable is it doesn't care. It can take unstructured data. One of the demonstrations that I have in store for us in the course that Lauren and I are going to create for you is to make our own log file format, one that certainly Splunk won't be familiar with because we're going to make it up. And when you go ahead and do this made up log file format, remarkably, Splunk can ingest that and then allow you to make sense of it. It really is remarkable.
You know what? It's something that I like that you said that all organizations can use. It's not IT specific, and I think that's something that we need to kind of push past. Like you said, all departments will utilize this.
That's right. And in fact, the courses that we're going to start with when it comes to Splunk, those courses, Lauren, they're going to focus on kind of the back of the house Splunk operations. So how do you get it installed? How do you maintain those indexes? How do you make sure you're in license good graces with Splunk? All those kinds of kind of back of the house things. Now, what's fascinating is Splunk also would involve training end users of Splunk. And Lauren, that's where if we end up delivering that kind of training here at IT Pro, we'll see if there's demand for it. But that's when we'll end up training anyone in the organization potentially, because if you work in marketing, you would want to Splunk that data. If you work in finance, you would want to Splunk that data. If you work in HR, you would want to be able to Splunk that data. So it really does have remarkable training implications for the organization as well.
Well, speaking of training, you might have seen it pop up on your screen, but you and I are about to launch a course. I think it says February 15th.
Oh,
I
that's the
know.
first time I've heard a date for our first course. That's exciting.
So we better get hustling
Yeah.
and talk to them about it. But before we even jump in, I want to remind you that you can go into the chat feature that's probably on your screen right now. You can ask us any questions related to Splunk, please, and we're happy to answer it. This is very engaging, and you've got the expert right here to ask all the questions.
Yeah. Yeah. And, any question at all, as Lauren indicated. So we can get as technical as you want to get, or we can stay high level as well. And Lauren and I are really excited about those courses. Notice it's multiple courses that we're going to release on Splunk. And just to kind of give you a bird's eye view of those, The first course is going to be all about getting started with Splunk quickly and efficiently. So, how do we install? How do we validate that install? How do we get up and running in a stable and quick manner? The second course that we're going to do is all about inputs. How do you get all of that text data into Splunk? This becomes a real issue quickly for organizations, especially if they fall in love with Splunk, because every department is going to be like, hey, we need to get our text data into Splunk and we want it in there quickly because we want to get the most up to date results when we're pulling data from that text data that's inside of Splunk. The third course that we're going to create for you is going to be all about advanced administrative techniques. One of the things that Lauren and I were discussing with Splunk when I was just sitting discussing Splunk with Lauren, she brought up the great point of, well, wait a minute, Anthony, what if there's sensitive information in the text data that's going into Splunk? And the example she gave me, which was spot on, was credit card numbers. Yeah, we might not be able to legally store someone's personal identifiable information like their credit card number. So you have to mask that. And in that third course, we'll show advanced manipulations like masking data as it goes into Splunk.
Well, this is fantastic. I know that I'm excited for the course to be coming your way February 15th. And so, behind the scenes, Anthony and I are going to be working tirelessly to make sure that you have all the hows and all the whys as to what's going on with Splunk and how you can implement it into your organization. Now, some of the questions are already flooding in,
That's
Anthony.
great. I figured, again, a lot of people have heard about Splunk, but I'm sure we're going to get some great questions.
Well, this is kind of your sign if you're looking for an opportunity to ask any question about Splunk. Maybe you've heard of it. Maybe you want to know how it's going to fit into your organization specifically. Put a question in the chat and we will read it on screen. So, Anthony, our first one is from Farbod, and he or she, they say, is Splunk a kind of container the same as AWS S3 buckets? What are your thoughts?
Wow. Okay. So, what a great question. And we get this question a lot. So, Splunk is ingesting all of the text data that your organization wants to put into it. But so is it a database? And or is it like an S3 bucket concept? And this is such a great question. And I actually had the privilege of working inside of the corporation called Splunk for a year of my life. And when I was in Splunk, it was fascinating to see their engineers arguing about this and getting annoyed because technically it's not a database. Technically, it is not a database. It is a high speed, high performant index for text data. So it is an index, and there are technical differentiations between that and a database. So I love what this student has done. Splunk is more like an S3 bucket than it is a database. So that was really intuitive and really spot on for our learner there that chatted that in. If I were to say, again, with a gun to my head, which is it more like? Well, it's more like an S3 bucket because if you know about S3 and AWS, one of the things that's being done is the indexing of the objects that are in the bucket for super fast retrieval. And that's a lot like how Splunk works.
Wow, that's fantastic. What a great connection that you made. Farbad, thank you so much for writing in. That came in from LinkedIn. So we actually have another question, and this one's coming in from YouTube, Anthony. This is from Sophie. They say, if Splunk is used for analyzing machine data and performing business operation, what sets Splunk apart from similar tools like ELK or Sumo?
Yeah, so one of the things that Splunk has going for it is the product was invented in 2013 and it has become very ubiquitous in organizations. In fact, a stat that Lauren and I were discussing before we started today was that they have incredible, what we like to call market penetration. 93 or 97 above 90 of the Fortune 100 companies use Splunk. I'm going to say that again because it's remarkable. Over 90 of the Fortune 100 use Splunk. So it almost becomes this game of what giant corporations aren't using Splunk, right? Because when we say Netflix, when we say Google, when we say Ford Motor Corporation, when we say, just company after company, giant organizations, they all use Splunk. So it's amazingly present out there. And because it's been around for so long, it has a huge community following. So one of the big differentiators is that it's not one of the new kids on the block. And boy, a boy band reference so late in the day. Don't know where that came from. But so it really is something that's very established with a great support community around it. Lauren, when I get stuck with Splunk, I've never had to call Splunk themselves. It's always been something that was answered quickly inside of the free Splunk community. So there's just this rich support around it. Another thing about Splunk that is unique is that there are two major deployment options now, and companies love to be given options. So if Lauren's starting her new organization and she wants to adopt Splunk, she can bring Splunk inside her organization and install it there and treat it like it's private cloud. But if she wants to make it more of like a public cloud thing, well, then she'll just get signed up for Splunk Cloud. Splunk now offers its own Splunk Cloud so that you don't have to run any of the software in-house. You can all have it cloud-based. So these are key differentiators. Now, keep in mind, one of the interesting things about Splunk, and if you look at their stock price performance over the company's history, you'll notice, some little valleys, not good. And one of those valleys was a result of Splunk being accused of not going to the cloud quick enough. So boy, oh boy, have they caught up, and they really are very proud of their Splunk cloud offering. So I think one of the things you see competitors doing a lot is they'll say, and I've seen this tagline, "We were born on the cloud." That's trying to take a little shot at Splunk, saying that, hey, Splunk was slow in going to the cloud. We were born and raised there. So, this is all kind of marketing stuff, but I hope that helps with some key differentiations between Splunk and some of the new kids on the block. And
Well,
there it is again, that boy band reference.
we need to get you a disc or cassette tape player. I'm not sure, but
I also need to get out of the 80s and 90s is what I need to do.
come to the future here.
Yeah.
Anyway, talking about Splunk going to the cloud, though, I almost would rather be a little slower to market and make it a masterful product rather than first to market and still be working out the bugs.
Lauren, you are so spot on there. One of the things that I've really loved about using Splunk for the many, many years that I've Splunked, I was using it prior to arriving at Splunk as an employee. One of the things that I love is their very careful, calculated, deliberate approach to any product changes. So it's not like, in fact, it just happened when I was last using Splunk prior to my full-time employment here at ACI Learning. I was on Splunk 8, and we're, of course, teaching Splunk version 9, and I was in a little bit of a panic about the version change. But again, Splunk is very careful that when they version things, you feel right at home. Core functionality is not altered. Core processes are not changed. So we have a very gentle learning curve for the new features.
This is fantastic. I'm so glad we're having this dialogue and it's so open. And I hope that you're joining the conversation that is blowing up on all of our LinkedIn and YouTube platforms. You can also go over to Facebook too, if that's your thing. We have a really great question coming in from Harry from LinkedIn. They say, in terms of networking, is Splunk vendor agnostic or does it work better with specific platforms and technologies?
It's like I planted that question. That is a great one that we need to discuss. One of the reasons that Splunk has become rather ubiquitous, and remember, it's not just for IT. A big reason that Splunk has become so present is that it runs and runs well on anything. So let's talk about the server components first. They run beautifully on Windows, on Linux. You could even host Splunk on a Mac. Okay, so I mean, it is a ubiquitous install. And as far as the client piece goes, as far as your users actually searching the Splunk indexes and creating these beautiful color dashboards with all these great graphs and up to the second metrics, all of that is web based. So that web utilization, that web, we call it Splunk web interface, is going to be readily accessible to all of your employees because what does it use? A web browser. You got a web browser, you're ready to start using Splunk. So it is very cross platform. One of the things that I knew our students would be interested in doing here in this live session is getting started with Splunk right away. So what I started doing just last night, there's only one video as of this very moment, but I promise I'll make another one tonight, as a matter of fact. So there'll probably be two by the time you check it out, is at my blog site, ajsnetworking.com. My initials, Anthony Joseph Sequeira. So that's ajsnetworking.com. I'm recording some little mini demos to show you as a teaser, really, of the kinds of things that we're going to be teaching you in these upcoming classes. And the very first video that I recorded for you last night was how to install and validate Splunk for free on a Windows box. So check out ajsnetworking.com if you want a sneak preview of how to get your hands on free Splunk and how to get it installed on a Windows box. And by the way, it's just as easy on the Mac or on Linux.
And that's great because that kind of tees you up to have a little background knowledge when it comes to the course that we're teaching that goes really in depth, you know?
Yeah, it's great. If our students can arrive with some of that legwork done, like they've already gotten the free Splunk and gotten it installed, you'll just be one more step ahead.
Oh, wow. You know what? Harry has another question. So, Harry, thank you so much for engaging with us. Your questions are fantastic. They're coming in from LinkedIn. It says, what are the pros and cons between cloud and on-prem, which is on-premise deployments?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It used to be, boy, we want it on-prem so we can absolutely control everything and we can button down the security. Not so much with this product. This product really begs for the cloud. And I think that's why Splunk got a little bit of a black eye when they didn't move to the cloud as quickly as they could have. This product really begs for the cloud, and here's why. The way Splunk works, remember, this is technically not a database. This is a high-performant index. And the way that works is it's read only. I'll say it again. Read only. In fact, I'll add the word period. Read only. That's it. So when your text data goes into the index, it is read only. It cannot be changed. That is inherently secure. So when you put that into the cloud, it's a paradigm that works very well for the cloud. There's going to be this unchanging read only data that is tucked away securely in Splunk Cloud. And so, boy, there's not a lot of reasons to stay on-prem with this product. With that said, imagine if you are a company the size of, let's say, Netflix, and you're using Splunk, and you already have a beautiful, high-performant, in-house only Splunk infrastructure. You're going to be really reluctant to change that. Under the old principle, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I'm thrilled that they maintain both ecosystems. But I'll be honest, if I was starting a company tomorrow and I was going to start that company with Splunk monitoring all of my text data, it would be Splunk Cloud for sure.
Well, that is a really good kind of quick sum up of the pros and the cons. And so I'm sure we could have a whole show just on that.
Yeah, and I want to say one more thing, Lauren, too. I don't want anyone to feel cheated, right? If I just said, woo, Splunk Cloud, but then here is Lauren and I teaching 3 courses on how to build Splunk Enterprise in your own infrastructure. Why are we doing that? Well, we did it for a very important reason. Everything you learn in Lauren and I's classes on Splunk translates to the cloud infrastructure. So you still have to know what an index is. You still have to know the parameters around an index. You have to know how parsing works in Splunk. You have to know how data masking works in Splunk. So everything we teach you is still going to be relevant if you are turning to Splunk Cloud. I suppose the one video you could skip is how to install, because you won't be installing Splunk if you're choosing the cloud option. It's already installed and waiting for you.
How easy is that? And so accessible in no matter how you're choosing to use Splunk. Now, I have to do a couple shout outs because you don't always have to ask a question. You can always just chat with us, and we would love to give you a shout out. We actually have people tuning in from all over the world, Anthony. We have Vahid from LinkedIn says hello from Iran, and we have Greg from LinkedIn saying hello from Pittsburgh, PA. So a little domestic, a little international. We
Yeah.
got everything going. We also have, Chris from LinkedIn says, I use Splunk daily though, and I would love to learn better queries. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So that is a wonderful, wonderful goal to have with Splunk. Splunk uses something called the Splunk processing language. I always have to pause on that because I have to remember what the P stands for. I always want to substitute some other word. But SPL, what does that sound like? It sure sounds like SQL.
Yes.
And I think they did that on purpose. The Splunk processing language is very much SQL like. And there's even a famous white paper on the Splunk documentation site that does a head to head comparison of SQL versus SPL. A lot of people come to Splunk well versed in SQL. So they, of course, immediately start asking, well, wait a minute, I can do it this way in SQL. How do I do it in SPL? So that's what that document is all about. But I would highly recommend that if you are right now ready to take your Splunk processing language to the next level, do it with the excellent documentation up at that Splunk site. Trust me, it is really good. And they will not only teach you the commands that you need to know for SPL, but they're going to give you examples and examples you can replicate in your own copy of Free Splunk. Something else that I would recommend too is, remember what we said, Splunk has been around for a long time, well established. So you can go up to that little bookseller online called Amazon, and you can go up there. And if you type in Splunk, you're going to get large texts that are dedicated to nothing other than that Splunk processing language. And I just remembered one more resource. There is an excellent book. Unfortunately, the author has passed away. He was an internal Splunk guru, and he wrote this excellent book that they make available for free in the documentation area. It's a large PDF. I actually downloaded it and then had it printed at a local print center so they could bind it like a real book for me. I know, nerdy. But I read that thing cover to cover, and it does an excellent job of boosting your SPL skills from an internal guru at Splunk.
That's really cool. You know, I have a great appreciation for actual physical books, so
Yeah.
I would be right there with you.
Yeah.
All right, we've got more comments coming in, like this one from Dwayne from LinkedIn. They say, what I like most about Splunk is the intuitive Splunk search language.
Yeah, it is very intuitive. I mean, I'll give you some SPL right now. You ready? Index equals Lauren. So don't hit the microphone. The director and the producers here of this show love it when I smack the microphone. Yeah, I love it. They just said my ear. That's great. Caleb and all the staff behind the scenes, thank you so much for doing this for us.
Mhm.
So when you are writing your Splunk queries, it is so much like plain English. So there's an index I have called Lauren, and I'm just saying index equals Lauren. And then if I want to find any instance of maybe the word fail or failed or failing or failure, any of those variations, I just do a search in that index for FAIL asterisk, the old asterisk wildcard. And now it's going to search through all of the text events, and it's going to highlight any that mention any variation of the word fail. These are the simple ways in which you can quickly, in very close to plain English language, be searching the index. And it goes one step better with Splunk. They absolutely knew there would be, how about the CEO of the company? The CEO of the company is probably not going to have time to learn Splunk processing language. In fact, he or she will throw you out of their office if you suggest that to them. So what they developed at Splunk was something called Pivot. And Pivot is where the CEO can just pull up the data in a point and click interface. They can say, oh, I want these fields and I want this metric analyzed. So they just click the mouse and the report that they need is generated for them. So it's important for us to remember, while there is a Splunk processing language for us nerds, there is also a completely graphical user interface way to explore the data that is targeted at those that don't want to learn any Splunk.
Oh, that's a great explanation, though, too. You know what, Anthony? I have to read this comment to you. This one is coming in from, it looks like Josh from Facebook. Thank you so much for joining us, Josh. Anthony, you're going to love this comment. He says, it is so nice to have Anthony back on IT Pro content. He has been one of my favorite edutainers for years.
That's so great. And I'm glad that that didn't come in from my mom, because she's watching right now. And, of course, she's only going to say positive things.
Well, thank you so much, Josh. That's very kind of you. And we are so happy to have Anthony back, because you're fun to work with, too, behind the scenes.
Yeah. And I'm thrilled to be back with ACI Learning. And one of the things that I love is to teach different topics. I mentioned that I was with Splunk for a year and I cherished that time. But of course, all I got to teach was Splunk. So I really love teaching a lot of wide variety of topics. And that's why I love ACI Learning.
Well, we are so happy you're here, and we're thrilled that you're starting out with Splunk, which you are so good at and very passionate about. We also have Greg from LinkedIn saying, can you have Splunk send out alerts when it sees or detects certain events?
Such a great question. And, Lauren and I really want to emphasize alerts and reporting. That is a big part of this. And one of the use cases that has been fascinating with Splunk is, and this was really popularized by both the Formula One people, and I am treading in an area right now where I know nothing about, so please forgive me. But apparently there's this really famous Formula One race team, and Splunk sponsored them, and now they're working with Splunk. And you talk about alerting and reporting. There's this car racing around at over 200 miles an hour on this oval track, and it is being splunked. So you have metrics about the fuel consumption, tire pressure, tire wear. I'm going to embarrass myself here if I try and keep going. But you have all these incredible metrics. And guess what? In milliseconds, they're able to report back to Splunk and give alerts about what is going on with that race car. So in real time, they're splunking the data from the race car, and obviously they're learning things that could not only help them win the race, but obviously also help save the life of the person that's in that car. So Splunk is known for remarkable alerting and reporting capabilities, and that's a huge part of the product.
That's a great question, Greg. And also, maybe you're thinking at home, well, Formula One uses it. Maybe our organization could be using it in a way too. So get thinking about it. But while you're thinking, we have another question coming in from Farbad from LinkedIn. They say, are there any certificates related to Splunk to help us progress in our career? And does it go under the database or infrastructure role?
Yeah, such a great question. So here's the thing. Because Splunk is multifaceted, the certification program reflects that. So let's say you take Lauren and I's 3 upcoming courses in the back of the house administration of Splunk. You'll be ready if you take notes and you do all the exercises that we ask you to do. You'll be ready for the Splunk Enterprise admin certification. So there are certifications tailored to the various aspects of Splunk. In fact, one of the very first certs I ever got, and it was so fun, was the search expert certification because I already knew Splunk from a using Splunk for search perspective. And if you want to get certified in that, you sure can. There's even a power user certification that I went and got that I had to study for really hard because, sure, I was a user of Splunk, but I was not a power user of Splunk, where you're using Splunk processing language to do things like machine learning predictive intelligence, where Lauren comes to me and she says, okay, we've had these sales over the past 5 years. Based on that, can you have Splunk predict what our sales will be in the 6th year? Splunk is very good at doing things like that. I just didn't know how. And that is what lies await for you in the certifications.
That's really cool. And Farbad, thank you so much for asking that. By teaching this with Anthony, I'm going to be learning a lot too. So I might be on your heels with certificates as well.
Yeah, you watch. Lauren will be Splunk certified within 2 weeks.
Well, especially after our course launches on February 15th. So make sure you're marking a calendar as well and being on the lookout. That's about to launch into your library and you want to be the first one to watch. So mark a calendar, set an alert, and be ready. Now, we have more questions rolling in. Make sure that you're engaging with us on all of our socials, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We're excited to engage with you and ask any questions you have. Now, I have a question.
Sure.
Before we jump into other questions. Let's talk about some of the use cases. You mentioned Formula One, but I'm curious about the military. I heard a little rumor that the military
Oh,
uses the U.S. military.
big time.
Hmm.
Big time. Uh, Anyone that has anything to track is going to be intrigued by these capabilities. This includes the military. How about your dev teams? This was an interesting one to me. So think about this. Maybe we have dev teams that are working on this new Internet of Things gadget. Maybe it's a sensor that's going to be installed in warehouses to detect things like temperature variations, humidity variations. So they're going to want that output to be splunked. But here's the thing we often miss the point of. When the dev teams are developing that IoT device, they're going to have logging of their own dev processes that are going on inside this widget that's being created, and they will Splunk that. So DevOps teams are using Splunk to gauge the success of their development. Then once the product they've developed goes live, it's spitting out log data as part of what it does, and that's being splunked. So it's just really amazing how so many different teams can rely on Splunk for so many different purposes. Something else that's interesting too is just the whole timeliness of it. Lauren may be using Splunk and she may be going back 10 years worth of text data to see trends and things like that, where someone might be using Splunk right next to her and all they care about is the last 60 seconds. Again, back to the race car example, when things are moving so fast in Formula One, you don't care about 10 minutes ago. You want to know what happened 10 milliseconds ago. So it's pretty fascinating how Splunk can kind of alter the way it's used in those different use cases.
Oh my gosh. I'm thinking of so many different ways that Splunk could be used. And when you say that, you can go back into the archives of data or you can use what happened milliseconds ago,
Yeah.
the possibilities are endless. And the fact that it's secure enough that the US military and many intelligence agencies feel secure enough to use this says
That's
a
a great
lot.
point. That is a great point because the military and high security organizations, they're not going to go near a product that has security weaknesses or known security flaws. And again, Splunk, been around a long time. They've got this thing buttoned down really well. And in our training, we're going to teach you how to make sure it's buttoned down. Now, Lauren, I have to tell you something. I am so thrilled that we didn't get a question that I was worried we were going to get hit with because Splunk has this, don't want to say bad reputation. That's not accurate. But Splunk does have a criticism that you will often hear, and it's quite frankly from people that don't really know Splunk. What happens is a lot of times you'll hear IT people say, "Oh yeah, Splunk, we can't afford it." So this big kind of rumor circulates that, "Oh yeah, you're going to get Splunk in your company, and then everyone's going to get addicted to Splunking everything, and then you're going to have this massive bill." And I'm here to tell you that, like most myths or rumors, there's maybe a slice of truth to that, but it is a huge exaggeration. How Splunk works by default is indeed ingest based pricing, meaning the more text data you're bringing into Splunk, the more money you owe Splunk. Yes, that's true, but that's not the only pricing model. And as Lauren and I were discussing before this event, Splunk is always free for 500 megabits or less of data ingested per day. And uh, when I was prepping for our upcoming show, I brought 200,000 events into Splunk, and that was only 20 megabits that were ingested. So think about that. I had 480 megabits of data to go before I would even hit that free cap. So Splunk can always be free for you based on that 500 megs or less of data ingested. And like I said, that's not the only way there is to price things. I'm sure someone like Netflix that's using Splunk and ingesting massive quantities of data, they have a different pricing scheme worked out with Splunk. So, can it be expensive? Sure, but there are ways to avoid tremendous expenses associated with Splunk.
Well, and as the average user, I love that you say that there's kind of tiers. There's free options depending on how much you're bringing in
Yep.
daily,
Yep.
but then there's also enterprise as well. So there's different tiers to frankly do what you need to do, and you just adjust your budget accordingly.
Yes, totally. And one more point on that, Lauren. I'm so sorry. I know we have a lot of questions, but one more quick point on that. Uh, Free Splunk is hugely important for two reasons to me. Number one, the fact that it can always be free is great for us learning Splunk, right? You're going to have your own sandbox that is always free. You're not violating any licensing by having free Splunk for the rest of your days as a study tool. That's hugely important. But here's the production reason why it's critical that we have free Splunk. We're going to emphasize this in our courses. You need to always test. So let's say our production team here, let's say Brad, who's in charge of production here, says, I want to make sure we ingest all of the logs that are coming off of our cameras, and I need it stored in a very particular way in the index. We're not going to jump into the production environment and just do that. No way. We're going to test that on a test server first and make sure it works just the way Brad wants it to work. You see where I'm going here? If you have one of these little test servers that's free of charge inside your organization, you'll be able to do a test data set that's under 500 megs for sure, and you'll be able to make sure that it's working perfectly before you go into production. So it's great that Splunk can always be free for us students and for internal testing.
Well, this is great. It actually segues perfectly into Harry's question from LinkedIn. They say, regarding Splunk's REST API, is it available to all versions, including the free version as well? And will we be covering that in our course?
Yes, indeed. And we don't get into the details of the APIs, but that is a great idea and something that I'm certainly going to make note of for future courses. But you're going to love this. Yes, the APIs are published, they're there for you to take advantage of. And you're going to love this. The only thing that I can think of off the top of my head that gets into more advanced licensing and free Splunk certainly couldn't do this, it's clustering. But think about that. If you are going to be building a clustered farm of Splunk servers, you wouldn't be confused with free Splunk at all anyways. I mean, you would know right off the bat that that's not going to be a free type of infrastructure. So my point is, even though you're practicing on free Splunk, it is very full featured. They're not holding back things like API access and things like that. That's just core, beautiful things about Splunk that you're going to get to test and you're going to get to experience. More very advanced features like clustering, well, they're not going to be there in the free Splunk because they don't even make sense to be there in the free Splunk. If you're clustering, you're dealing with gigabits of data that's coming in, not megabits or megabytes. I'm messing up on saying those right now because I just am, but you know what I'm trying to say. So, when we're ingesting gigabytes of data, we may need a server farm for that, and that's not free.
Well, Harry, thank you so much for writing in, but also great answers, Anthony. This has been fun. I want to tell you about something that's happening that you might want to mark down again because I'm the queen of calendars. Our next webinar is coming your way. It's actually all things cybersecurity, which is with Mike Saunders on March 16th at 2 p.m. So put that in your calendar. Make sure that you don't forget about it. And Anthony, any final thoughts before we wrap up all about Splunk today?
I'll tell you, that went by really quick. I could talk about Splunk forever, clearly. I just want to thank everyone so much for being here and for the really, excellent questions. We had some prepared in case, and we didn't have to go to a single one of those prepared questions. So thank you so much, everyone.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Anthony. Great job today. And make sure that you join us on February 15th in our course library so that you can be the first in line for all things Splunk. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'd love to see you next time. Anthony, thank you so much for doing this.
Can't wait for the classes.
See you, everybody.